Once the sun goes down, the other children come out. Every kid in the village knew that phrase, but nobody was brave enough to say it out loud. The village of Nando sat in a quiet valley between two old hills. It was a place with red clay houses built in neat circles, where smoke from cooking fires drifted slowly into the evening sky. During the day, Nando felt like any other village. You'd hear kids laughing by the river, see women crushing grain, and find the elders sitting under the big baobab tree telling stories from a long time ago. But as soon as the sun started to hide behind the hills, Nando changed. The laughing stopped. Doors were shut. Heavy bolts slid into place. Every single child in the village was locked inside their home. There were no exceptions, not even for a second. This rule was older than the oldest person in town, and nobody argued with it. "Get inside before the sun touches the hills," the mothers would always warn. Kids grew up hearing this warning from the moment they could walk. No child in Nando had ever been allowed outside after sunset, and nobody ever explained why. Some people said it was to keep the kids safe from wild animals in the forest. Others whispered about spirits that wandered in the dark. But whenever a kid asked too many questions, the elders' faces would turn hard like stone. Some truths, they would say quietly, are better left alone. But curiosity is like a fire. You can't keep it hidden forever. In Nando, there was one boy named Tobe whose curiosity was even stronger than his fear. Tobe was 12 years old. He was thin, fast, and noticed everything. While the other kids followed the rules without thinking, Tobe always wondered about the things nobody talked about. Why did the elders go silent whenever someone mentioned the night? Why did the village drum beat 3 slow warnings every evening before sunset? Why did mothers check the door locks 2 or even 3 times before it got dark? And the biggest mystery of all, why did the adults look so relieved when the first rooster crowed at dawn? These questions stayed with Tobe everywhere he went. One evening, while the sky turned bright orange and purple over the hills, Tobe sat outside his family's house. He watched the shadows stretch across the dirt. His mum was making dinner, and his dad was already back from the farm. Everything looked normal, but for some reason, the coming darkness felt heavy and strange. Then, the village drum started. Boom, boom, boom. 3 slow beats, the warning. All the children rushed back to their homes. One by one, you could hear the sound of doors slamming shut. Tobe stood up slowly, watching it happen. His mother appeared at the door. "Tobe," she said, her voice sharp and serious. "Get inside." Now. He did what he was told and stepped into the dark hut. Right away, his mother pushed the wooden door shut and slid the heavy lock into place. Then she went over to the small windows and checked the shutters. They were closed. They were locked. Once she was sure they were safe, she turned back to the fire where she was cooking. Tobe watched her every move. "Mom," he asked softly, "why do we have to lock the doors every single night?" She froze for just a second. Then she forced a small smile onto her face. "To keep you safe," she said. "Safe from what?" Tobe asked. She didn't answer. She just kept stirring the pot. Outside, the sun sank lower and lower. The sky turned dark. The very last bit of light disappeared behind the hills. Night had finally arrived in Nando. Inside every house, the children sat in total silence, while the parents spoke only in whispers. Nobody laughed at night in Nando. Nobody sang. The whole village became strangely, eerily quiet. Tobe lay down on his sleeping mat, staring up at the grass roof. He couldn't fall asleep. His mind kept thinking about that one question. What actually happens outside after the sun goes down? Hours went by. The fire inside their hut died down until it was just glowing coals. Eventually, his parents fell asleep. The silence got even heavier. Then, suddenly, Tobe heard a sound. Footsteps. They were soft and light, coming from right outside the house. His heart started thumping in his chest. It sounded like children walking. Then he heard more footsteps and quiet whispering. Tobe sat up slowly. Kids? Outside? That couldn't be right. Every single child in Nando was locked safely inside their home. Unless his chest felt tight, with a weird mix of being scared and excited. Very slowly, he crawled toward the small window. The wooden shutter was tied shut with a thin piece of rope. Tobe paused. If his parents woke up, he'd be in huge trouble. But the whispers outside didn't stop. His curiosity was just too strong. Carefully, he untied the rope and pushed the shutter open just a tiny bit to look out. Bright moonlight was shining over the whole village. What Tobe saw made him freeze. Children, dozens of them. They were walking through the village streets. They were playing, laughing quietly, running past the houses and climbing over fences. There were kids his age and even smaller children too. But something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Tobe pressed his face closer to the gap in the window. One boy walked right under the moonlight, and Tobe felt a shiver run down his spine. The boy looked exactly like Kene, the blacksmith's son. But that couldn't be true. Kene was locked inside his house, just like everyone else. Then Tobe saw someone else. A girl was walking near the well. She looked exactly like his neighbour, Ada. She had the same braids and the same red dress. But Ada was supposed to be fast asleep inside her family's home. Then more children showed up. Every single one of them looked familiar. They looked exactly like the real kids from the village. Tobe's heart beat even faster. They looked like the village children, but something about them felt off. Their movements were way too smooth. Their laughter sounded empty, like an echo. And then there were their eyes. When one child turned toward the moonlight, Tobe saw them clearly. Their eyes were totally black. There was no white part and no brown part, just pure darkness. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the village. All the children stopped moving at the exact same time. Every single one of them. Then they slowly turned toward the houses. They looked at the windows and the locked doors. It was like they were searching for something, looking, waiting. Tobe felt sick to his stomach. Then one of them spoke. It was a little girl standing by the well. Her voice was soft, but it didn't sound human. "Soon," she whispered. The others smiled. It wasn't a normal kid's smile. It looked like something just pretending to be a child. "Soon," they all said together. Tobe slammed the window shut, his hands shaking. His heart was pounding as he scrambled back to his sleeping mat. Outside, the whispering didn't stop. It just kept drifting through the streets. For the first time ever, Tobe finally got why the adults locked the doors. It was because something was walking through the village at night. Something out there looked exactly like the kids of Nando. And it was just waiting. It was waiting for a door to open. It was waiting for a child to step outside. It was waiting to take their place. Tobe didn't sleep at all that night. Long after he closed the window, he could still hear the whispers outside moving through the village like dry leaves blowing in the wind. Sometimes the things laughed. Sometimes they ran. Sometimes they even knocked gently on the doors. Tap, tap, tap. Every single knock made Tobe's heart jump in his chest. He lay perfectly still on his mat, acting like he was asleep whenever his parents moved in their blankets. But his eyes stayed wide open in the dark. Those children, outside, looked exactly like his friends in Nando, but they weren't them. He knew the truth now. Deep down, he could feel it. They were waiting. They were waiting for something to happen. They were waiting for someone to open a door. The hours went by very slowly. The moon rose high over the village, and the weird footsteps outside slowly went away. Finally, right before the sun came up, it was quiet again. Then the rooster crowed. It was the first sound of the morning. Right away, the village started to wake up. Doors creaked open and bolts slid back. The adults stepped outside carefully, looking up and down the streets before they let their kids come out. Life in Nando went back to normal, as if nothing strange had happened at all. Kids ran around the dusty paths, laughing, chasing goats, and kicking small balls made of woven grass. Tobe stood outside his house, watching them very closely. He saw Cain there. The blacksmith's son was alive and looking totally normal. He was laughing with the other boys near the well. Tobe felt a knot in his stomach. He had seen Kene outside last night, or at least he saw something that looked exactly like him. Tobe walked slowly toward the group. "Good morning," Kene said with a big grin. Tobe looked at his face carefully. He had the same eyes, the same smile, and the same voice. But Tobe couldn't stop thinking about one thing. "Did you hear anything last night?" Tobe asked quietly. Kenny just shrugged. Just the wind. No footsteps, no voices. Kenny laughed. "You worry too much, Tobe." The other boys started laughing too. "You sound like one of the old men," one of them joked. Tobe forced himself to smile, but he still felt a deep sense of worry inside. None of them knew. None of them had seen what he saw, or maybe they were just too scared to ever look. The whole day went by slowly. Tobe tried to act normal. He helped his dad carry water from the river and picked up firewood near the edge of the forest. But he couldn't stop picturing the same thing. Those black-eyed children walking in the moonlight, and the way they turned toward the houses, searching for a way in. That evening, as the sun began to set again, the village felt tense once more. Then the drums sounded. Boom! 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 The final warning. Kids scrambled back to their houses. Doors shut tight. The heavy bolts slid into place. Tobe's mother checked the window shutters twice, just to be sure, before she started the evening fire. But tonight, Tobe was ready. He had made up his mind. He had to see them again. After dinner, his parents lay down to go to sleep. Tobe waited patiently. 1 hour went by, then 2. When his parents' breathing became deep and steady, he quietly got up from his mat. His hands were shaking as he crawled toward the window. Slowly and carefully, he untied the rope again. The shutter opened with a tiny creak. Moonlight poured into the room. Tobe looked outside. At first, the village looked empty. The houses sat silent under the bright moon. For a second, he wondered if he had just imagined the whole thing. Then, he saw something move near the baobab tree. One child was standing there all alone. It was a small boy. He looked exactly like Obi, the farmer's youngest son. The boy tilted his head a little, staring at the houses. Then he smiled. More figures started coming out of the shadows, dozens of them. The night children. They stepped out from between the houses, from behind fences, and from the edge of the forest. Their soft laughter drifted through the air. They started walking around the village again. But tonight, Tobe saw something he hadn't noticed before. They were copying the real children. One spirit was kicking an invisible ball across the ground. Another pretended to climb a tree. A group near the well was playing a silent game of tag. They were practicing. They were learning. They were studying exactly how the real children acted. Tobe felt a chill run through his whole body. "They are learning how to become us," he whispered. Right then, one of them stopped. It was a girl. She looked exactly like Ada again. Slowly, she turned her head toward Tobe's house. His heart stopped. Her black eyes stared directly at the window. "Has she seen me?" For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. Then she started walking toward his house. Step, step, step. Tobe's breath caught in his throat. She walked slowly, holding her head in a weird, unnatural way. When she got to the door, she stopped. The girl lifted her hand. Tap, tap, tap. The soft knocking echoed through the quiet house. Tobe covered his mouth so he wouldn't gasp out loud. His parents moved slightly in their sleep. Outside, the girl spoke softly. Tobe. His blood turned cold. She knew his name. "Tobe," the voice said sweetly. "Come outside and play." The voice sounded exactly like Ada's. It was perfect. It was convincing. But Tobe remembered those eyes. Those empty black eyes. He stayed perfectly still. Outside, the girl waited. Then her voice changed. The sweetness was gone. "Open the door," she whispered. The house was filled with silence. The girl stood there for a long time. Then, suddenly, she smiled. It wasn't a kid's smile. It was like a hunter who knows its prey is hiding right there. And slowly, she turned and walked away. Tobe stayed frozen until he couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. When he finally felt brave enough to look out again, the spirits were gathering by the well. One of them spoke in a low voice. "They are being careful tonight," another one replied. "But one day, a door will open." Then they all laughed. It was a hollow, scary sound. Then one of them said something that almost made Tobe's heart stop. "Soon we will take their places." The others nodded. "Yes," the girl whispered. And when the real children are gone, her black eyes shined in the moonlight. No one will even know the difference. Tobe shut the window fast, shaking with fear. Now he finally understood the truth. The night children weren't just walking around the village. They were waiting. They were waiting to replace the real kids of Nando. If the village didn't find out the truth soon, one morning the doors would open and the wrong children would walk outside. Toby couldn't stop thinking about what he heard. Soon we will take their places. Those words stuck in his head like a drumbeat. All morning he watched the other kids in Nando with a different perspective. They laughed and played just like they always did. Nothing looked weird. But now Toby knew something they didn't. Every night, something that looked exactly like them walked through the village, watching, learning, and waiting. If what that spirit said was true, one day they would replace the real kids. The thought made Tobe feel sick. He had to tell someone. But who would believe him? If he told the elders, they might punish him for being awake at night. If he told his parents, they would just tell him to stop asking questions. But there was one person in Nando who might actually listen. Her name was Mama Goi. She was the oldest person in the village. Her back was bent like an old tree branch, and her hair was as white as the moon. People thought she was almost 100 years old. Even the elders went to her when they needed advice. Some said she remembered stories from before the village was even built. If anyone knew the truth about the night children, it was her. That afternoon, Tobe quietly walked to the edge of the village where Mama Goi lived alone under a large acacia tree. The old woman was sitting outside, crushing herbs in a stone bowl. Without even looking up, she spoke. "You walk like someone who is carrying a heavy secret child." Tobe froze. "How did you know?" Mama Goi laughed softly. "Your footsteps sound nervous." She finally looked up at him with sharp, wise eyes that seemed to see everything. "What's bothering you?" Tobe hesitated. Then he leaned in and whispered, "I saw them." The old woman stopped grinding the herbs immediately. The air felt like it suddenly got colder. "Saw what?" she asked quietly. "The children outside after the sun goes down." The stone bowl almost slipped out of her hands. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she looked around to make sure nobody was listening. "Come inside," she whispered. Inside her house, the corners were filled with dark shadows. Mama Goi lit a small lamp and sat across from Tobe. "Tell me everything you saw," she said. Toby explained everything. The whispers, the black eyes, the knocking on the doors, and how the spirits were copying the real children. When he finished, Mama Goi closed her eyes. "I was afraid this day would come," she whispered. "You actually believe me?" Tobe asked. "Yes," she answered quietly, "because what you saw is real." Tobe leaned in closer. "Who are they?" The old woman started whispering. "They are called the Mimiki." Tobe made a face. "The Mimiki?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. A long time ago, before Nando was ever built, this land belonged to wandering spirits. They didn't have bodies of their own, so they watched humans and were jealous of their lives. Her voice got even darker. They learned to copy people, like a reflection in the water. But reflections can't hurt you, Tobe said. These can, Mama Ngozi replied. They can't live in our world unless they replace someone. Tobe's heart jumped. Replace? Yes. Her voice was shaking a little. If a Mimiki tricks a human into stepping outside at night, the spirit can take their shape. And what happens to the real child? Mama Ngozi looked away. Vanished. The word felt heavy, like a curse. Tobe's throat felt tight. So that's why the village locks the doors? Yes, she said. Many years ago, children started disappearing. At first, nobody knew why. But then, she leaned in closer, one mother noticed something weird. What? The child who came home in the morning wasn't her son anymore. Tobe's skin crawled. A Mimiki had taken the boy's place. He felt a chill run through his whole body. And the real child? Mama Ngozi shook her head slowly. Nobody ever saw him again. The house went totally silent. Then Tobe whispered something that made the old woman's eyes go wide. They said something last night. What did they say? Tobe swallowed hard. They said that soon they will take the children's places. Mama Ngozi's hands started shaking. That means they are getting stronger. What does that mean? Tobe asked. It means the wall between their world and ours is getting thin. She stood up slowly and walked to the door, looking out toward the village. If even one child opens a door. Her voice trailed off. Then what? Tobe asked, feeling very nervous. She turned back to him. Then the Mimiki will finally enter our world. Tobe's heart started racing. And if that happens? The old woman's face looked dark and serious. They won't stop with just the children. Suddenly, the evening drum sounded from outside. Boom, boom, boom. It was the sunset warning. Mama Ngozi grabbed Tobe's arm. You have to go home right now. But what can we do? Tobe asked. The old woman paused for a moment. There is only one way to stay safe. What is it? The doors must stay closed, she said firmly. No child can ever go outside after the sun goes down. Tobe thought about the spirits he saw knocking on doors, calling kids by their names, and using familiar voices to trick them. What if someone opens a door by mistake? He asked. Mama Ngozi's face looked very grave. Then the Mimiki will finally get into Nando. Tobe left her house with a heavy feeling of fear in his chest. The sun was already touching the tops of the hills. Kids were running home as fast as they could. Doors slammed shut everywhere. Bolts slid into place. Night returned to Nando. But this time, Tobe knew the truth about the darkness. As he lay awake on his mat, listening to the quiet village, he was scared that something terrible was coming. Outside, in the moonlight, the Mimiki were waiting, and tonight they sounded closer than they ever had before. Tobe didn't wait long to look outside that night. As soon as his parents were asleep, he quietly went to the window and untied the rope again. His fingers were shaking as he pushed the wooden shutter open just a tiny bit to see the village. The moon was even brighter tonight. Its pale light covered Nando like cold water. For a few moments, nothing moved. The houses were silent. and the paths were empty. Tobe wondered if maybe the Mimiki hadn't come back. But then a shadow moved near the well. One child stepped into the moonlight. Then another one appeared, and then another. Within seconds, the whole village seemed to be filled with them. Dozens of children were walking through the paths of Nando. Their voices drifted through the air like echoes from far away. They laughed. They whispered. They played strange, quiet games under the baobab tree. But tonight, something felt different. They weren't just walking around for no reason anymore. They were staring at the houses, studying them, and waiting. Tobe's heart started beating faster. It felt like the Mimiki were getting ready for something big. Then, suddenly, one of them spoke out loud. The others all stopped moving. Every single spirit turned toward the middle of the village. Tonight, we try again. Tobe felt a cold wave of fear hit his chest. Try what? The spirits all gathered together near the well. Among them, Tobe saw the girl who had knocked on his door before the one who looked exactly like Ada. She stepped forward like she was the leader. They are afraid, she said softly. They hide behind their doors like scared animals. Another spirit laughed. But fear makes humans make mistakes. The girl nodded slowly. All we need is for one person to mess up. Then the Mimiki spread out across the village. Some moved toward the houses, others climbed fences or sat on the roofs. They looked just like the real kids of Nando. If you saw them during the day, you wouldn't notice anything weird except for those empty black eyes. Tobe's stomach twisted. He watched as one Mimiki walked up to the house where Obi lived. Obi was the youngest boy in the village, only 6 years old. The spirit stood outside his door and knocked gently. Tap, tap, tap. A small voice came from inside. Who is it? The Mimiki smiled. It's me, Obi, the spirit said in a sweet voice. The voice was perfect. It sounded exactly like Obi himself. Inside the house, the real Obi sounded confused. But I'm Obi. Outside, the spirit giggled softly. No, silly. I'm out here. Come play with me. Toby's heart was pounding like crazy. The Mimiki was trying to trick the little boy. Inside the house, Obi's tiny voice answered again. My mum said never to open the door at night. The spirit leaned closer to the door. But it's me, it whispered. I'm your friend. Then the door latch started to rattle. Tobe's breath caught in his throat. Obi was actually reaching for the lock. No, Tobe whispered urgently, even though he knew the little boy couldn't hear him through the walls. Don't open it. Suddenly, a woman's voice shouted from inside the house, Obi, get away from that door! The latch stopped moving. The Mimiki's smile disappeared instantly. The door stayed shut. For a second, the spirit just stood there, perfectly still. Then its face twisted with pure anger. You were close, another Mimiki said quietly from the shadows. Yes, the girl who looked like Ada replied. Very close. She stared at the house thoughtfully. They are careful tonight, but they won't be careful forever. The spirits started gathering together again by the well. Tobe watched them nervously. Then something happened that made his blood run cold. Another Mimiki stepped forward. This one looked exactly like him. It had the same face, the same hair, and even the same clothes. The copy tilted its head, studying Tobe's house. "Tomorrow night," it said calmly, "I will be the one to try." The other spirits nodded. "Yes," the girl said. "If they see their own reflection outside, they might actually trust it." Tobe's entire body froze. They were planning to use his face, his voice, and his look to trick someone. The Mimiki version of Tobe turned slowly toward his house, and their eyes met through the window. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the spirit smiled a slow, creepy smile. "You are watching," it whispered. Tobe slammed the shutter closed immediately. His hands were shaking violently. They knew he had been spying on them the whole time. Outside, he could hear faint laughter drifting through the air. "You can't hide forever," the Mimiki Tobe called out softly. "Soon someone is going to open a door." The footsteps slowly faded away as the spirits disappeared back into the night. Tobe leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Now the danger was worse than ever. The Mimiki weren't just trying to trick random kids anymore. They were planning something bigger and smarter, and tomorrow night they were going to use his own face to do it. Tobe knew one thing for sure. If he stayed silent and didn't tell anyone, eventually someone in the village would make a mistake and open a door. If you want to find out what happens next, if you want to see whether Tobe can stop the Mimiki before it's too late, and if you're ready to discover what truly happens when a door finally opens in Nando, then you do not want to miss part 2 of this story. Because what is coming next is far more terrifying than anything you've heard so far. Drop a comment below. Tell me this. Do you think Tobe should tell the truth or keep quiet? And make sure you like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next part. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what happens next. Thank you for listening.